On Monday morning, June 19th, I hastened to the field of battle. I was compelled to go through the Forest de Soignes, for the road was so completely choked up as to be impassable, and I had not proceeded far before I stumbled over the dead body of a Frenchman, which was lying on its face amongst the grass. The corpse was so frightfully disfigured, and so smeared with mud and gore, that I felt horror-struck, but when, on advancing a little farther, I saw hundreds, and in less than an hour thousands of slain, I found my pity for individuals merge in the general mass, and that the more I saw, the less I felt. So true it is that habit reconciles everything. The dead required no help, but thousands of wounded who could not help themselves were in want of everything. Their features, swollen by the sun and rain, looked livid and bloated. One poor fellow had a ghastly wound across his lower lip, which gaped wide, and showed his teeth and gums, as though a second and unnatural mouth had opened below his first. Another, quite blind from a gash across his eyes, sat upright, gasping for breath and murmuring, "De l'eau! De l'eau!" The anxiety for water was indeed most distressing, the German Wasser, Wasser, and the French de l'eau. De l'eau still seems sounding in my ears. I am convinced that hundreds must have perished from thirst alone, and they bade no hope of assistance, for even humane persons were afraid of approaching the scene of blood, lest they should be taken in requisition to bury the dead. Almost every person who came near, being pressed into that most disgusting and painful service. This general burying was truly horrible. Large square holes were dug about 6 feet deep, and 30 or 40 fine young fellows, stripped to their skins, were thrown into each pell-mell, and then covered over in so slovenly a manner that sometimes a hand or foot peeped through the earth. One of these holes was preparing as I passed, and the followers of the army were stripping the bodies before throwing them into it, whilst some Russian Jews were assisting in the spoliation of the dead by chiselling out their teeth, an operation which they performed with the most brutal indifference. The clinking hammers of these wretches jarred horribly upon my ears, and mingled strangely with the occasional report of pistols, which seemed echoing each other at stated intervals from different corners of the field. I could not divine the meaning of these shots, till I was informed that they proceeded from the Belgians, who were killing the wounded horses. Hundreds of these fine creatures were, indeed, galloping over the plain, kicking and plunging, apparently mad with pain, whilst the poor wounded wretches who saw them coming, and could not get out of their way, shrieked in agony, and tried to shrink back to escape from them, but in vain. Soon after I saw an immense horse, one of the Scotch Greys, dash towards a colonel of the Imperial Guard, who had had his leg shattered. The horse was frightfully wounded, and part of a broken lance still rankled in one of its wounds. It rushed snorting and plunging past the Frenchman, and I shall never forget his piercing cry as it approached. I flew instantly to the spot, but ere I reached it the man was dead. For though I do not think the horse had touched him, the terror he felt had been too much for his exhausted frame. Sickened with the immense heaps of slain, which spread in all directions as far as the eye could reach, I was preparing to return, when as I was striding over the dead and dying, and meditating on the horrors of war, my attention was attracted by a young Frenchman, who was lying on his back, apparently at the last gasp. There was something in his countenance which interested me, and I fancied, though I knew not when or where, that I had seen him before. Some open letters were lying around, and one was yet grasped in his band, as though he had been reading it to the last moment. My eye fell upon the words, "Mon cher fils," in a female hand, and I felt interested for the fate of so affectionate a son. When I left home in the morning, I had put a flask of brandy and some biscuit into my pocket, in the hope that I might be useful to the wounded, but when I gazed on the countless multitude which strewed the field, I felt discouraged from attempting to relieve them. Chance had now directed my attention to one individual, and I was resolved to try to save his life. His thigh was broken, and he was badly wounded on the left wrist, but the vital parts were untouched, and his exhaustion seemed to arise principally from loss of blood. I poured a few drops of brandy into his mouth, and crumbling my biscuit contrived to make him swallow a small particle. The effects of the dose were soon visible. His eyes half opened, and a faint tinge of colour spread over his cheek. I administered a little more, and it revived him so much that he tried to sit upright. I raised him, and contriving to place him in such a manner as to support him against the dead body of a horse, I put the flask and biscuit by his side, and departed in order to procure assistance to remove him. I recollected that a short time before I had seen a smoke issuing from a deep ditch, and that my olfactory nerves had been saluted by savoury smell as I passed. Guided by these indications, I retraced my steps to the spot, and found some Scotch soldiers sheltered by a hedge, very agreeably employed in cooking a quantity of beefsteaks over a wood fire in a French cuirass. I was exceedingly diverted at this novel kind of frying-pan, which served also as a dish, and after begging permission to dip a biscuit in their gravy for the benefit of my patient, I told my tale, and was gratified by the eagerness which they manifested to assist me. One ran to catch a horse with a soft hussar saddle. There were hundreds galloping over the field, and the rest went with me to the youth, whom we found surprisingly recovered, though he was still unable to speak. The horse was brought, and as we raised the young Frenchman to put him upon it, his vest opened, and his outrelle fell out. This is a little book which every French soldier is obliged to carry, and which contains an account of his name, age, pay, accoutrements, and services. I picked it up and offered it to my patient, but the young man murmured the name of Annette, and fainted. Annette. The name thrilled through every nerve. I hastily opened the livrette, and found that it was indeed Louis Tissande whom I had saved. The rest is soon told. Louis reached Brussels in safely, and even Madame's selfishness gave way to rapture on recovering her son. As to Annette, but why perplex myself to describe her feelings? If my readers have ever loved, they may conceive them. Louis soon recovered. Indeed, with such a nurse he could not fail to get well. When I next visited Brussels, I found Annette surrounded by 3 or 4 smiling cherubs, to whom I was presented as le bon Anglais, who preserved the life of their papa.